weekend when tragic events overshadowed the successful release of Don Tidey. Death on duty for a young Garda recruit and a soldier. A brutal bombing claiming lives in mid-London Christmas shopping. An off-duty UDR man gunned down in front of his 10-year-old son. Tonight, in the bleak winter landscape of Leitrim and Cavan, that intensive search for the criminals goes on. Later in the programme, we report on the latest from the scene.
From London, we report on the mood and response of the Irish community in Britain after the Harrods bombing and speak to Leon Britton, the Tory Home Secretary, about the official British government reaction. We'll also hear from Neil Kinnock, leader of the British Labour Party. With a cabinet meeting in Dublin tomorrow due to consider a report from Justice Minister Michael Noonan on the pros and cons of any move to proscribe Sinn Féin, we talk to Minister Gemma Hussey about possible government action.
On this night, as families in so many places are united in grief, we start where the heart of this nation's pride was stained with sorrow. In Moat and Carrickmacross, two brave men who so willingly gave their lives for the community were laid to rest. In their deaths, the real honour of the Irish people, the commitment to peace, is more than fully justified.
It was chillingly cold in Carrickmacross last night as the Garda cortege drew up, its blue lights winking softly through the gloom. Behind them, the hearse resplendent with the tricolour, bearing the remains of Garda recruit Gary Sheehan, shot dead at 23. Among those waiting outside, Health Minister Barry Desmond, representing the government, and what seemed to be most of the population of Carrickmacross. There were thousands in the church for the service and hundreds more outside in the freezing cold. The coffin was borne in by a party of classmates from Templemore, marshalled by the head of the Templemore College, Chief Superintendent John Galvin. They entered the church through a double rank of young Gardaí, ramrod straight as they paid their last tribute to a colleague, the first Garda recruit to die on duty during his term of training. Gary's father, Detective Jim Sheehan, with his wife. He has served in Carrickmacross for 19 years. Behind the family party, a close friend almost overcome with grief. Gary Sheehan joined the Gardaí just a few months ago. His training at Templemore still had 5 weeks to go. He died on his first operation with the force. He seems to have been a particularly popular young man, and we spoke to some of his friends in Carrickmacross about his personality.
He's a very determined chap. Like, if he got an idea into his head, he'd do it. He got a couple of, bad turns as a guard on the work end of it. He was made redundant twice, but he always picked himself up. He always was determined to go out and get another job, and get a secure job. And for a fella of 23, he lived his life to the full. Like, he really enjoyed himself. He travelled a lot, he loved travelling. And that's what he wanted to do more than anything. He wanted to travel more and meet people. And he had a great ability, I think, to, in a way, to take people out of themselves. And he was just great at that, great personality. And everybody very popular with everybody wherever we went. We travelled a lot together, everywhere.
What is the feeling in the town about what's been happening over the last couple of weeks, the kidnapping, that, apart from the personal thing now?
I noticed on Friday evening in particular when it broke, there was a lot of anger, and people felt that they had kept their mouths shut for too long, It was probably uncontrolled emotion on Friday evening, but I get that impression that people feel that it's time people stood up and were counted.
You think opinions may change as a result of this?
Yeah, I noticed. I went into one of the local bars on Friday evening, and there's no doubt about it. Farmers from out the country were in there having a drink, and when they heard the news, they were tremendously angry about the whole thing. And they certainly were in a mood where they felt that the people who would allow this kind of thing to happen or be part of it shouldn't be listened to anymore, or shouldn't be even spoken to again. Very, very strong feelings, I thought, on Friday evening.
The town may have appeared united at the time of the H blocks. I think the town is more united now, with a much different feeling in the complete opposite direction.
It has made that much difference.
Oh, yes. An awful lot of people who are just completely apolitical have finally decided that they've taken enough. This has been the straw that broke the back. Enough is enough.
It is usual to speak well of the dead, but there was no doubting the sincerity of the tributes to Gary Sheehan in Carrickmacross this week. Full of energy and enthusiasm, he was recognised by his friends as one who would, in time, have become a leader in the community. Last Friday, a bullet put an end to his life, but perhaps not to his influence and example.
In Moat, Private Patrick Kelly's was a full military funeral, his coffin draped in the tricolour. But it was also a family funeral, his wife and 2 of his 4 children, his parents, brothers and sisters mourning their loved one. Public representatives paid their respects to the first Irish soldier killed on active service in his own country since the Civil War. They were led by the President, Dr. Patrick Hillary. It was a simple, concelebrated ceremony, the lament, one for a man who, Bishop Colm O'Reilly said, gave his life so heroically for our country and our freedom. The Taoiseach, Dr. Garda Fitzgerald, mourned Private Kelly too. He was a soldier who spent much of his 14 years on peacekeeping missions in Cyprus and the Lebanon. But it was with his comrades from Athlone that he went to rescue Don Tidey in the lonely Leitrim countryside. Today his father, an elderly man, a man of little property, reflects on his son's short life. And his widow, Katrina, thinks of an all too short marriage.
Patrick Kelly's parents still live in the family home. It's a simple whitewashed cottage in northern Longford. They've had 10 children, and both of the eldest, Jim and Patrick, chose the Irish Army for their career. You have a long military tradition in the family, I think, Mr. Kelly. Isn't that right? You were in the army yourself?
Okay.
And your father, Mrs. Kelly, he was in the British Army, is that right?
He was in the British Army.
When was that?
In the 1914 war.
He was in the Dardanelles, I think you said.
He was in Italy. Flanders.
Did you ever think when your sons went into the army and when they went to the Lebanon that something like this might happen one day?
No, I never thought that to be said.
It's a hard life though, isn't it, the army?
It is. But they liked it. Liked the army. Jim and Pat loved the army. Patrick was a good, honest fella, and he liked the army. Lots of hard work. Worked very hard.
Used to bring home presents from Lebanon and that
he brought home presents, Dal. Several different things, relics from the Holy Land. He used to go out when he was there. It was wonderful. The wonderful son to the world.
Paddy was a man that he loved rooting around with cars, and he taught the world of the army. And he loved going out to the foreign countries.
When Paddy settled down on his own, was he able to spend much time with his father and mother after that?
Yeah, he used to come down to see us. Nearly every week, every couple of weeks, like.
All the way from Moat?
Yeah.
So he must have been a very good family man.
He was, yes. He used to bring his family down as well. Like.
It'll be hard now for the kids and for their mother left by themselves.
Yes, it will be very hard.
Two of Patrick Kelly's sons watch their father's coffin. It's carried past them down the aisle of this small church in Moat. The bearer party is composed of his army comrades from the Western Command. It's the age-old ceremony for fallen warriors. On this bitter December day, there's an almost tangible silence in Moat. The guard of honour outside the church pay their respects to their dead comrade. But their dead comrade was a husband too. His grieving widow is comforted by friends and neighbours. The coffin is placed in the hearse for the last journey. The Bishop, Colm O'Reilly of Garda and Clonmacnoise, comforts Catriona Kelly before she joins her husband's funeral cortege. Private Kelly's remains are laid to rest in the small cemetery at Tubber. Ironically, it was in the nearby church that he and Catriona were married. The flag is removed before the coffin is lowered into the ground. This is always the moment of greatest sorrow, the final departure of a loved one. But at this military funeral, there was one difference. At the request of the family, no volley was fired. They had heard enough gunfire. This morning, I asked the Minister for Defence, Patrick Cooney, how worried he is by this weekend's events.
I'm worried by it because this is the first time since 1922 that a member of the Defence Forces has been killed in an internal strife. And the level of ruthlessness that we see at the moment is a cause for worry.
There have been calls since Private Kelly's death for Sinn Féin to be proscribed in the Republic. Do you think it is time to proscribe that organisation?
I've heard those calls, and as the Taoiseach said, this is something that can be given consideration. It poses difficulties, practical and legal difficulties. Obviously, it will be considered, and the Leader of the Opposition has offered support in whatever line the government might take. There might possibly be a halfway house that, for example, again, speculating to some extent, that membership of provisional Sinn Féin could be an impediment to membership of a local authority, for example, or it could be a bar to receiving public funds. There might be halfway houses towards total, on the way to total prescription.
Do you think that prescription might in fact be a double-edged sword?
It's hard to know. It's one of the considerations that will have to be taken into account.
You mentioned Mr Haughey's statement yesterday in which he said it was now time for everybody to give full support to the government. What's your response to that call on his part?
I'm very pleased to hear it, and it's what I would expect from a responsible opposition party.
The role of the army to date in terms of the disturbances in Northern Ireland has been mainly in terms of border security. What role do you see for the army now, particularly in terms of its relationship with the Garda Síochána?
Well, the army doesn't have any independent role in the security field, and along the border it's not acting independently. It's acting solely in support of the guards, and it only comes out of barracks when called on by the guards for assistance. So it'll be a continuation of that role. It's for the guards to decide what the operational role in combating terrorism is going to be, and how the army is going to be involved.
Given the fact that most of the Gardaí are still unarmed, do you see a particular role for the army in terms of backing them up?
Well, of course, that is why the army is called out in situations where firearms are likely to be used against the guards. The firearm response from the state is provided by the army primarily.
Do you feel, Minister, that democracy is now under threat in the Republic?
No, I don't, but there are enough signs to warn of us, those of us who are concerned with democracy, and especially those of us who have responsibility for safeguarding it, to make sure that it doesn't come under any real threat.
Do you think that there has been an ambiguity in terms of public attitudes and indeed church attitudes to the role of Provisional Sinn Féin and the IRA?
I think perhaps not so much ambiguity as a carelessness, a failure to see sharply the evil of the provisional movement. I think that's where the defect lies, that we've become blasé because the thing has been with us for so long, and we've failed to see its real evil, and it's taken these awful tragedies to bring this home to people.
Do you think the government itself has been sufficiently aware of the potential dangers?
I think all governments are aware of the potential dangers of a terrorist movement as ruthless as the provisionals.
Last night, the Garda at Ballinamore were confident that the fugitives they sought had not broken through the security cordon. Their confidence was justified when just after 1 o'clock today, there was a positive sighting of 3 men wanted for the Tidey kidnapping. They were seen in Ardmaneen Woods, just 8 miles north of Ballinamore. After an immediate intensification of Garda and Army activity, the woods were completely encircled. The search of Ardmaneen Woods will continue at first light. Later in the programme, we'll be getting an update from Brendan O'Brien, who's been at the scene of the search since early morning.
The hunt for Don Tidey's kidnappers and the killers of a Garda recruit and Army private has been described as the biggest combined Garda-Army operation in the history of the state. Up to 1,000 Army personnel giving search and firepower backing to the Gardaí. Earlier today, the man in charge of the search, Garda Chief Superintendent J.J. McNally, was confident, even at that stage, that the kidnapper fugitives were still inside his double-ring dragnet.
I am very satisfied with the way it's going. It's a slow process, no doubt due to the nature of the terrain, mountainous country, rather rough type of country, more rough than usual.
But are you confident that the men are still inside your net?
I am pretty confident that we have them contained in that area. Of course, you will appreciate that it's very, very difficult. It's very heavily wooded, and the woods are not the old type woods where some are cut away. It's all new wood, overgrown, and very, very difficult to search. Now, the search must be meticulous because we found in the other case that there was a very small little hut type affair that was in the middle of the wood, took a lot of finding, and we'll have the same problem again, we feel.
But it could be that the men know the terrain very well. I mean, why are you confident that they're probably still inside?
Well, we have the place pretty well surrounded by checkpoints. Of course, again, there's nothing, we can't be very definite about anything, and certainly they may have got out, hijacked a car which we would not be aware of, because people are afraid to report those matters. And here I'm asking that anybody that has any information, no matter how small or how slight it may seem to them, to let us know. It'll be treated in the strictest confidence.
Have you been getting full public cooperation?
Full public cooperation. In fact, the people of Ballinamore have been more than good to us. They provide us with all facilities possible, including their school, and allow their children to go free of exams for Christmas. Of course, they'll be delighted, but they provide us with their school as our headquarters for investigation and for the Army.
But yet Ballinamore is an area which has given electoral support to Sinn Féin. There's at least one prominent Sinn Féin man in the town. Do you think that there is still public sympathy?
The people of Ballinamore town are shocked and numbed, as we were with the murders of those 2 young men. They have given us every support. I have had sympathy, handshakes of sympathy on the street, messages of sympathy. Local organisations, and there are several very good organisations here, have offered their sympathy. Now, having said all that, I am confident that there are a number of people in this area who would give help and aid to those men.
And do you think that they might have some public support? After all, they have had electoral public support.
They have no public support. Their support is very, very limited. But as I said, there are people in this area who would give help and aid to them.
Now, insofar as the operation is concerned, would you agree that it is the largest combined Army Garda operation since the foundation of the state, perhaps? I
would certainly say that. From my experience in police after 40-year service nearly, it certainly is the largest operation that I have known of. We have large contingents of Army, as you see here. We have got their Army Air Corps backing us up in aid of the civil power. I have units, detective branch units and members as far away as Limerick and Galway and Clare.
The Garda Technical Bureau are continuing their forensic investigation here in Derrada Wood. This is day 4 since Don Tidey escaped from this spot around 3:30 last Friday and ran back towards the road. The heavy-duty plastic hideout tucked in under these pine trees was less than 2 feet across, 5.5 feet long, and was a mere 2 feet high at one end and rising to 3'8" at the other. The gang of 4 or 5 made a hasty retreat in a blaze of gunfire. Garda forensic experts have found many items for building up evidence, including spent cartridges, fired at almost point-blank range at the search party. A grenade was also thrown, and in the confusion, at least 2 Army FN rifles got lost and weren't recovered. In the end, Garda recruit Sheehan lay dead at this young pine tree, and a few feet away, Army Private Kelly's body was found slumped over this sapling tree. They were two of a search party of about 20 or 30 men spread around this end of the wood. Meanwhile, the Army, in a major display of strength, hunted out the killers of Private Kelly, who was buried today, the first Irish soldier killed by internal Irish forces. The Army's commander here is Lieutenant Colonel Dixon.
These two men were shot down in cold blood without warning, and that is our reaction to it. Any illusions that may have existed have been removed from everybody's eyes.
The Provisional IRA put out a statement pointing out, as they said, that their men shot in self-defense.
I haven't seen that statement. I haven't heard it, but that is not our version of what happened. We have no doubt about that.
Well, insofar as you can at this stage, tell me, what is the Army's version of what happened at that point?
Well, all I can tell you is that a full investigation is obviously taking place. Debriefings have not yet been completed, but as I said, we have no doubt that both of these men were shot down in cold blood without warning.
Now, this has been described by the Garda, and I presume yourselves, as the largest combined Garda Army operation in the history of the state. Would you go along with that?
I would, yes. As far as I am aware, this is the largest Garda Army cooperative mission of this type.
Now, over the weekend, a representative of the Garda sergeants and inspectors said we have a situation in the Republic now which is akin to the 20s and 30s. Is that a bit of an exaggeration?
Well, I wouldn't be prepared to comment on that, but as far as we are concerned, our mission here is to support the Gardaí, and beyond that, I cannot go.
And is cooperation going well between you?
Cooperation is excellent. I have never seen a headquarters. I have a combined headquarters here. I've never seen a headquarters operating as well.
If these border areas and those deaths of our own Garda and soldier provided one tragic focus for the nation's attention this weekend, the London bombing provided another. In part 2, we report from London on the Irish community's response. We talk to the British Home Secretary. And with us in studio, Gemma Hussey, Minister for Education. Rejoin us then in just a moment.
Bailey's Original Irish Cream, a purely personal pleasure. Just right.
Shop at Spar for unbeatable Christmas value, such as Spar Minerals 29p, including bottle deposit 39p, My Waddy only 75p. And from the Spar Mystery Christmas Tree, over 2,000 prizes must be won. Enter now at Spar and Spar Shop and Save.
How's that? You've got to watch my kids, sister. Especially when Mama's given us Milky Ways.
My children love Milky Ways. They're delicious chocolate outside and have a lovely whipped centre that won't fill them up. And they still enjoy their lunch.
Good job I've got eyes like a hawk.
Milky Way, the sweet you can eat between meals without ruining your appetite.
Une ambiance agréable.
A pleasant setting.
Un bon ami.
A good friend.
Deux verres.
2 glasses.
Le tire-bouchon.
The corkscrew.
Le vin.
Piat d'or.
Le piat d'or rouge.
Fruity, exceptionally smooth.
Le piat d'or blanc.
Delicate, fresh, medium dry.
Le piat d'or.
The French for good wine.
Kensington, as simple as draughts, as challenging as chess, the greatest family game in years.
Now from Essel, this attractive glass free with £12 worth of motor fuels. See this sign.
Here's a quick tip for Christmas presents. The fast-drying Clairol 1200 hairdryer.
The Christmas gift that goes on giving. The gift of music from K-Tel.
Invest with the big one. Irish Permanent, Ireland's biggest building society.
Ask Santa for Lemon's Season's Greetings, a festive assortment of your favourite sweets.
Get the neat heat of Bordnamona peat briquettes for your Christmas fire.
Welcome back. Well, the government, of course, was well represented, as indeed was the opposition at both those funerals today. Minister, you were at both those funerals. What's your reaction today? How do you feel about it?
Well, I'm sure I share the reaction of all the people watching this programme, and indeed all the people throughout Ireland in the last few days. To be there today and to see the grief of those two families was indeed heartbreaking. And it has brought it home, I think, to everybody in the country, just what we're facing. It was an extremely sad day, and it made me feel and think about the thousands of people who have gone through this in Northern Ireland in the last decade or so. That was perhaps my overriding feeling, that we were a country united in grief.
And what about, indeed, the kind of effort that's been made for generations now by many people, many ordinary guards, many ordinary soldiers, and nobody say thank you to them?
Well, I don't think that people don't say thank you to them. I think the majority of the people in the country very much support the security forces. I think there perhaps have been incidences where there has been discussion about the role of the Gardaí in particular and difficulties in that area. But by and large, I think the population in general know very well where the Gardaí and the army stand in this whole question of subversion and threats to the state.
This wasn't particularly a good day maybe to test the national morale, certainly not at two funerals, but do you have a sense, Minister, of people stiffening their resolve in regard to subversion?
Very much so. I have heard people talking today around the two funerals, and I've heard them talking over the weekend, that the line must now be drawn. They feel that ambivalence has gone on too long, that we have a threat. The Minister for Defence said earlier, and I was glad to hear him saying that he doesn't believe this democracy is seriously threatened. Perhaps these two brave young men have given their lives in a cause which we will all be so grateful for, that we will wake up this country to what is going on and the kind of people that are in our midst.
And then we did have that neighbour in Carrickmacross who was making the point that it's not that long ago since that looked like a solid Provo town to many people.
Yes, indeed. And I think it was wonderful to hear him talking about how they have, this has shocked them out of that. It's sad that it should take anything like this to shock people, because the kind of ambivalence that has built up over the years has led to a lot of young people in particular being misled and thinking that the kind of constitutional type politics which Sinn Féin have been indulging in are something that they can legitimately follow. Of course, it is now quite clear, if it was never clear before, that their politics are simply a mask for the gun.
You represent a particular part of the country, Wicklow, which has always had a strong Republican tradition going back to the days when that was a respectable word. Do you think that there's a softening there also in your own area?
Very much so. It is, I find, in the last few years in Wicklow, the support for, as you call it, so-called republicanism, which is not the old kind of republicanism, is diminishing very much and by the day. And I think the pattern of voting over the last few years has shown that.
What about the mood? Many people have this feeling it's time to hit back. It's time. They want to get up. They don't want to talk. They want a bit of action. And there will be a lot of pressure. There must now be pressure on you to prescribe Sinn Féin. How do you feel about it?
Well, I absolutely understand it. Like everybody else in this country, and I'm just a normal person like everybody else, one feels such anger and such shame and such disgust that you want to find some way to vent that anger and to say now something must be done and done quickly. And of course, a government is there to make decisions in a very calm and rational way. We have to look at every side of that question, and it will be looked at in a more searching manner than it has ever been looked at before. But certainly no decisions will be rushed into, and I would be very surprised if the government tomorrow will make any decision of a major kind like that. It will have to be very carefully thought out.
What about that suggestion the Minister made of a halfway house? It seemed to me a little bit odd that he was talking about ambiguity, but suggesting a halfway house as a way of facing a problem.
Well, I think he's expressing a concern, which you've expressed, and which many people have expressed, that a response to this particular, these two particular atrocities should be found. I believe that all the options, such as the ones he's mentioned, will be examined, and I couldn't possibly comment on how far we would go in any of those areas. All I know is that every member of the government shares with everybody in this country the disgust and the shock, and indeed the great sympathy also with people in London for what's gone on. We feel, we share that very deep sense of shame, and we feel we must now approach this thing in a very, very searching manner.
Do you think necessarily, Minister, it would require new powers in order to take action? After all, the view might very well be that statements made on public platforms which suggest ballot papers in one hand, arm lights in the other, that's very close to incitement, isn't it?
That has always struck me, and indeed the extraordinarily sick statements today, which I read in the paper of Mr. Adams, I find almost impossible to comprehend. And
this is the statement where he's saying that he wouldn't condemn the London bombings, that these people were just doing their duty.
I find an interpretation of doing duty in that respect to be, it seems to me, a challenge. It is describing some people as belonging to an army of some kind, challenging the security forces of democratic states. That is a very serious statement in my view, in line with other very serious statements, and this will all have to be considered for what action should be taken. I quite agree with you.
And yet, it's the sort of language that seems to have some appeal for the minority or a substantial proportion of the minority in the north, and why is that?
Well, the Northern Ireland community has gone through so much in the last 13 years. I believe that the degree of alienation in the Northern Ireland community, which comes from very many factors, including the continuing political impasse, I think that it is understandable that there should be that sort of mass alienation leading to votes cast in ways which I don't believe people in this part of the country would consider for one moment.
Not even in the Dublin Central by-election?
The vote in the Dublin Central by-election, as I said on that day, was a very worrying one, particularly because I believe it was very many young people going to the polls. I can see that the people, that particular candidate and other Sinn Féin candidates, put themselves up on a series of policies and very carefully do not mention the main policy, which we know now to be murder and bombing.
But they were offering themselves as people who did something on the ground that the established politicians weren't doing.
They were indeed, and at a time like this for this country, and and in a place like Dublin Central, that had an appeal. Quite certainly it had an appeal, and that is a measure of the challenge to us all.
Finally, Minister, for people tonight looking at you might say, there's something I want to do. What is it they should be doing?
Well, I would like to say to people that it is now time that they should speak out against anybody they know who is anything to do with men of violence, that they should stop being ambivalent, that people who they know involved in any of these organisations, they should take them on themselves and discuss it with them and make sure that these people know what they think. But most of all, to the people in any part of the country, if they have any information that would help the security forces to find these people and to root them out, all of the people involved in this series of disasters, that they should immediately do so. That is the best thing people could do.
Minister, thank you. Thank you. Well, last Saturday, as Londoners and visitors milled around at their Christmas shopping, an IRA bomb beside Harrods brutally blasted 5 to death and dozens to severe injury. It pushed, perhaps in some evil way, was intended to push the Irish community in Britain into the forefront. Reporting for Today Tonight from London, we have Joe Little.
This is Oxford Street, the main shopping area in London. This morning, just 6 shopping days before Christmas, it was almost empty. the Harrods store, scene of Saturday's IRA attack. One sales assistant in the store at the time was Catherine Smith.
As a North of Ireland woman working in Harrods last Saturday, you must have felt particularly concerned.
Yeah, you felt sort of disgusted about the whole thing, and the fact that living in Belfast, I'd never sort of come so close to a bomb before. I never come so close to being, well, I was very, very frightened, in fact. But in Belfast, I hadn't been involved in, anywhere near bomb scares or whatever, but just in London it had happened to happen.
Michael and Betty Casey live with their Irish family in Kilburn. For them and for a million other Irish families here in Britain, Saturday's news had a special meaning.
My kids could have been down there. I mean, it's the Saturday before Christmas where everybody's gone shopping, gone out to do their Christmas shopping, and it's got to be all spoiled by, by a bomb going off, and, it's sort of wrecks everybody's home. It sort of puts the dampers on everything for everybody.
They mustn't consider us as being Irish if they're prepared to make us victims of the sort of action that they've taken. I'd go as far as to say that I'd be very, very annoyed, very angry, that they would call their action an action in the name of Irish people, because so many Irish people are shocked and horrified, victims of such an action.
What way are they victims?
Well, they're victims in two ways. They can be victims of the actual atrocity. There are plenty of instances where people have been killed by bombs who they would argue they were trying to help. They can... The bombs don't discriminate between Irish, English or any other nationality. They'll just kill people, full stop. And they can also be victims because they have to live with the repercussions of something like the Harrods bombing, where we all have to go to work next week, and there are people, the majority of people wouldn't blame us personally for anything that happens, but you will get the odd person who wants to make a comment, and who, because you are ready to acknowledge the fact that you have Irish connections, that they're very, very quick to condemn you as if you were responsible for it. That they hold you personally responsible. As I say, it's not everybody's like that. The majority of people are just as outraged as we are and don't apportion blame, but you'll get the odd one or two who'll make very cutting comments.
Kilburn's Sacred Heart Catholic Church. It's the centre of London's biggest Irish community.
What do you think the response of Irish people here in Kilburn will be to the bombings yesterday in Harrods?
I think it's absolutely disgusting. I really do. I was really sick.
And I feel ashamed, really. I don't hold with innocent people being interfered with. I mean, they're causing... some of my best friends are English people. I work with a lot of English people, and I think this is a disgrace. And I think there should be something seriously done about it.
I think we're disgusted and we're thoroughly ashamed. I think this is a terrible thing that happened, that is. And it certainly is not in the name of the Irish people.
A terrible disaster. It's bad outlook on all the Irish living in London.
We don't want it over here. I don't think we want it really. In any part, Ireland or here.
How did the bombing make you feel?
Well, I haven't a good outlook on bombing all along, so... on people that does that, so... anybody does it, there's only one place for them.
London's National Westminster Hospital. This morning, 20 bomb victims were still being treated, and opposition leader Neil Kinnock paid them a visit.
Are you worried at all that the anger here in Britain at these bombings might in some way or other affect the Irish population here?
I think it's highly unlikely, because the people who come from Ireland and live here are in great numbers respected members of the community, people who the British people understand to be as different as any normal person from bombers who put themselves outside the ranks of humanity. So I don't anticipate any kind of reaction or persecution of Irish people. They are, I know from my own experience, as disgusted, as revolted, as angry with crimes of this kind as any other group in the population.
I represent many Irish people in Parliament, and my Irish constituents are as disgusted and as angry and as horrified at this atrocity as everybody else in the country.
Would you like to take any opportunity to say those things to Gerry Adams?
I won't be seeking an interview with Mr. Adams. You know what our view is on all of these matters, that it is only worth talking to people who are committed entirely to the democratic road. And the idea of a gun-toting Democrat, of course, is an inconsistency in itself. You either are a Democrat and accept the obligations and responsibilities that go with that, or you choose a different road. You can't ride both rails.
Does this bombing make it more difficult for you to espouse your Labour Party policy of hoping for a united Ireland?
No, I think that it would be foolish in the wake of a horror of this kind for any major changes of policy by anybody. It's exactly that kind of response that terrorism looks for.
Mr. Kelly, how did you react to the IRA statement last night that they, in their own words, regretted the bombing?
It doesn't make the people we've seen any better, does it?
No. It's not going to bring anybody back to life, will it?
Labour on the political implications of the bombing, and of course that bombing was debated in the House of Commons in London this afternoon. And central to the debate, a statement by the Home Secretary responsible for security, Liam Britton. Afterwards he spoke with Joe Little.
Home Secretary, why do you view the IRA disclaimer of the Harrods bomb attack in the way that you do?
I think it's contemptible to suggest that units of your own so-called army can be disowned in this sort of way. That's the first reason, because everybody knows that they operate in a semi-autonomous way and that it's easy to say afterwards, well, we didn't want that to happen. I think also the suggestion that really it was all the police's fault is absolutely outrageous and insupportable, because the fact of the matter is that the timing of the device was such as to pretty well ensure that it would go off when those people who were dealing with it had just about arrived at the scene. And I think it's a piece of hypocrisy brought about by the fact that the outrage and condemnation has been so universal that the IRA have decided that they'd better disown it.
In the House of Commons this afternoon, you faced a question about the prospect of banning provisional Sinn Féin. Broadly speaking, as you consider that prospect, what are the arguments for and against?
Well, I don't think that I ought necessarily ought to seek to give a summing up of the arguments for and against. The attractions of banning it are obvious in view of Sinn Féin's involvement with the men of violence. The arguments against are practical ones of whether it would actually help in the battle against terrorism. And we shall have to weigh those arguments and come to a conclusion, and we shall do so shortly.
Will you be watching the decision of the Dublin government on this very topic?
Well, obviously Dublin will have to make its own decision, and we'll have to consider the matter.
What impact would a decision in Dublin to ban provisional Sinn Féin have on your government's thinking?
Well, I don't think that one can go into hypothetical questions of that kind. Obviously, both governments are at the moment considering this question, and each will have to draw up its own balance sheet of the pros and cons.
This, of course, is your first challenge as a Home Secretary in facing the awful sequel of a car bombing attack.
That is correct.
How sensitive are you in the follow-up operation to the problem of perhaps alienating some Irish opinion within Britain?
Well, I must say, listening to what was said in the House and hearing other expressions of opinion outside the House, I think the overwhelming majority of Irish people in this country are totally behind us in the expression of revulsion against what has occurred. And I think that what Mr. Hume said is a very vivid illustration of that.
This, of course, is Christmas time, and for Irish people in Britain and on the other side of the Irish Sea, it's a time of travel and exchange between Britain and Ireland.
Yes.
What must the traveller this Christmas now expect to meet at the ports as he or she enters this country?
Well, I don't think that it'll be very different from other Christmases, but obviously if the prospect of security threat arises and people have to be delayed because that's gone into, I'm sure that the travelling public will understand that that is a reasonable thing to be asked to do, but I have no reason to expect any special problems.
Do you regard the Harrods bombing generally as a change in strategy by the Provisional IRA in Britain?
No, I don't. They've engaged in, sadly, there's a long history of IRA violence on this side of the Irish Sea, and there's been phases where the targets have been military, and there have been phases when there have been indiscriminate civilian action as well. And this is one of those phases.
You've laid a lot of emphasis in your House of Commons statement on the need for security cooperation between Dublin and London now. Do you foresee any identifiable change in strategy in the security approach between Dublin and London?
The cooperation is very good, and I'm sure it will continue. And I'm not proposing a particular change of tack on that, as far as that's concerned.
Lastly, the Saturday bomb attack occurred only hours after an emergency in the Republic of Ireland, after the recovery of Don Tidey, the shooting of a soldier and a member of the Garda. Do you see any significance, any possible significance in the timing of this attack by the IRA only hours after that emergency in the Republic?
I don't know whether there is or not, but I think it underlines the fact that we're all at risk and that we're all in this together, not only at both sides of the Irish Sea, the various communities, but it's interesting that Americans have been involved in what's happened in London, so that every decent citizen of countries of both sides of the Irish Sea should join in condemnation and cooperation and support of the security authorities on both sides of the Irish Sea and doing everything possible to prevent this kind of thing happening again.
And of course the question would be asked, will there be a political initiative to match that security cooperation? Can we look forward to further political initiative?
Well, of course there's an underlying political problem below all this, but I don't think the aftermath of an event such as happened on Saturday is the occasion for going into that.
Home Secretary, thank you very much.
Joe Little talking to British Home Secretary Leon Britton. As you heard earlier tonight in the news, some fugitives were spotted about 8 miles north of Ballinamore and are surrounded, it seems, in Ardmoneen Wood, somewhere where Brendan O'Brien is close at hand. Hello, Brendan.
Yes, Pat, right now,
what is the
200 Garda and Army personnel are surrounding a wooded area of around 1,000 acres set up against the Quilca Mountains. It's about 2 miles from where Don Tidey was discovered last Friday. The weather there is said to be cool. It's not raining, but there is heavy black cloud cover. Garda believe they have the 2 men contained in the area of the wood, but it's extremely difficult terrain. Access to it is across about 3/4 of a mile of soggy bogland. Immediately the men were spotted this afternoon, the incident centre at Ballinamore National School was radioed, and Garda and Army personnel rushed to block off the area. Garda are still not sure if the 2 fugitives ran into the L-shaped wood or alongside and around it. Garda sources are convinced the men have no radio equipment and are without food. Garda are now placing little significance in the blood which was seen by searchers today. They're not certain if it was in fact human blood. They say neither of the 2 fugitives is thought to be injured. Well, the mood here in Ballinamore tonight is now one of uplifted spirits and quiet satisfaction that at least some of the IRA kidnapping gang will be captured. During the long night ahead, Garda and Army people up in the cordoned-off wooded zone will be replaced on a shift basis to allow them get some very much needed sleep. And this is Brendan O'Brien at Ballinamore handing back to the studio.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm not sure if you're still there.
I am.
Yeah, just a question. Do you know what sort of firing orders the Army or the task force have? Will they be allowed to fire on sight if anything happens?
As I understand it, not firing on sight, no. But obviously they're up against men who have shot 2 of their comrades. So they're in a battle situation.
In a battle situation and presumably in a battle mood. Thank you very much indeed, Brendan O'Brien. Over to Brian Farrell.
So we end this special Today Tonight, a programme that began with brave sorrow as we buried 2 brave men, ends now with the hope that this sad spectacle will come to a successful conclusion. We will, of course, be keeping in touch with events, and if needs be, we'll be back on the air with you. Till then, from Today Tonight, good night.
famous wines of France.